My name is Morgen. I'm 27 years old, so I'm the same age as HTML, which is really rad for me. My pronouns are they and them only, and I'm non-binary. I'm also the founder of Thirst, not Thrust, I wish. It's a dating app for queer people of all genders, and essentially we're the first dating app of its kind. So we started a few years ago, really prioritizing people who don't fit into the binary boxes of gender. So we had 15,000 users, we had a lot of support before we even started, and then once we launched, we shut down. So the main reason is, why did you shut down? An app clearly had a need. What was the problem? And the problem was targeting users from other platforms. So a lot of people said, oh great, an app for the LGBTQ plus community, let's harass them, let's target them, let's manipulate vulnerabilities within your platform to attack these users who might otherwise not be able to use other dating apps. So we had a huge problem on our hands and a very small team. So our thought process and our design process had to reorient from simply getting to an investment stage to keeping users safe. So that's how I got here. A year later, we raised our seed round, which is amazing. It took us a long time, but we finally got there. And we were able to really sit down and think about, what does design mean for our users, which are people we know, our community, our friends, our family, but also marginalized people, right? People who are underserved on other dating platforms, especially in a world where we have Tinder, we have OkCupid, we have Match, but there are so many people who haven't been able to meet friends, meet people outside of their immediate community, and haven't been able to find love. So it was a pain point for us that we really had to address. How did I get here? I went to business school at Northeastern, and I really enjoyed it, so that was the foundation of my educational background. I did data analytics at MIT, and I also worked at a startup at MIT, which exited in 4 months. But I realized I'm looking at data points all day and numbers, but not people. So I left and went to art school, which really, it scared my entire family. But it was a great decision for me. So I really enjoyed my time at Pratt, really connecting with people and understanding the depth behind humanities. Why is it so important to understand what matters to people, but ultimately users? And I realized a lot of dating platforms, a lot of apps, a lot of things that exist to connect to people are inherently designed that way. So it took a lot of years of research and studying, why is it profitable that people can't find their communities? Why is it profitable that certain people are excluded from that ideal match or the ideal dating user? So we really had to evaluate. There's tons of data. I'm sure everyone's heard of the plethora of OkCupid studies, which center white people, able-bodied people, class-privileged people, and so they pretty much alienate everyone else. So when you have a study like that, and you publish it without understanding the implications of why that happens, you simply perpetuate that behavior. So we said, okay, there's a huge problem. It's designed this way. How can we fix it with a very small startup bootstrap budget? So it's been fun. But one of my favorite singers, Hosier, says, it's not the song, it's the singer. And I paraphrased that last week, and I said, it's not the design, it's the designer, which I think is essentially true. Whenever we look at platforms, we are so quick to critique this design choice or this framework instead of saying, what is the mindset that went into this design that led people to deploy this product in the first place? So ideally, you should start with a theory. What is the theory behind your design? What is the thought behind your design? And every person brings their personhood to their work, their identity to their work. So what am I bringing to my role? My background, my friends and family, my education, of course, but also my preference, my aesthetics. I like clean design, but what does clean mean for someone who hasn't been privileged to have a clean space? So it also involves class. We talk a lot about how class influences aesthetics, but so do race, so do location, so do gender, sexual preference, etc. And so all of those things create a form of bias that we bring, whether good or bad, into our work. And so someone might say, this is great, but for someone else, if they're more marginalized, they automatically reject it. So how do you differ or relate to your users and consumers? And that's a key point of just entering any design phase of saying, am I different from my users? And is it class-based only, or are there other factors that are impacting that design work? And how can I bring my perspective in to empower my team and users? So everyone has a point where they can say, I can help this process in a way that no one else can. So it's about recognizing your own unique ability to say, I come from this experience, this is what I can share that will help someone else on my team alleviate this pain point. And then the final point, which is incredibly important under the help section, is why would the user trust me as a designer, as a content creator, if I haven't established that relationship of trust? And that relates a lot around to these original harm points. What am I bringing to my role? If they can't relate to you or the work you create, then it's your job to alleviate that. And so for our design process, it was very simple. When you sign up for Tinder or OkCupid, especially 2016 to 2018, it looked a little bit like this: man, woman, other. And so for many millions of people, not just in the US, but globally, they fit into the other. But the idea or the process of othering yourself means you scroll down, it's 1-2 clicks, other, and then entering one of, at the time 13, but now 46 gender categories predefined that are in English, which alienates people who speak English, who have the time to click through that, and also don't mind the emotional pain point of othering themselves again when they already exist in a world that doesn't fully acknowledge their existence. The ideal is something that we're working on creating. It's incredibly difficult on the back end, technically, to have so many data points or so many variables, but that we're working towards is your gender is your choice. And that is the ideal design. So functionally, it's difficult, but it works when we have users say, this is the first app I've ever used to try to connect with another person. Or this is the first time I've had hope of meeting someone else who could love me. And so that means a lot for us. And the tough part is working from the perspective of your weakness. As a tech founder, it's so easy to get caught up in ego, or what makes me feel good, or what can I do to get a headline, or be recognized within my team or within my community. But really the points that allow us to shift our perspective and really create meaningful and impactful design are our weak points, the things that we don't necessarily recognize all the time, but exist in our spaces, in our communities, in our workplaces. And here's a really good example of someone recognizing their weakness in terms of the design process and reacting, I would say, appropriately. So here's just a quick overview of how to approach who am I within my work process and within my team. The obvious one is identity. So what do you bring to the role, but also who are you? Many design teams are very racially centric, so saying, okay, does everyone on my team look as I do? We also bring class into it. A lot of designers are paid well above their users. We need to acknowledge, is my decision actually impacting the friction in someone else's life? And what does that mean? We have to also talk about power and the relationship to power between a designer and a user. You create choices, many of them are non-consensual. So a user can't say, I actually don't like that. They simply just don't use your platform or your app or your website or whatever else you're designing. So we make these decisions for users because they trust us to understand them, to research what their actual needs are, and to alleviate their pain points. But also position. So within that realm of identity and power, you can have various positions where you relate to other people, and you can choose to either step forward and say, I will be the person to listen to someone else who has a different pain point from me, or step back and say, you know what, it's not my job to listen, I simply need to support, and then impact. So bring all of these three forward and saying, how does my identity in collaboration with the power that I hold and the position that I currently have influence the design and the work that we're aiming to do? And here are some habits that are really important that I see often when I work with other teams, whether we're using an API or a third-party service. I'm frustrated by the teams that we have to work with that haven't undone these harmful habits within their own culture and impact our work that we need to do. The first is lack of self-awareness. Are you the ideal person to be addressing this problem or creating this design? And that's a huge one. I wish folks would just sit with that and say, why am I making this? Me as a person, from my positionality, from my power, from my privilege, why am I the one to create this thing? And am I actually helping? Moral signaling. We see a lot of services that we wanted to work with. We're like, okay, great, you have an excellent service, but we realized on the back end, apart from the things on their website and the folks of like a diverse team, they hadn't actually done the work internally to make sure that all the pain points on our end were alleviated. So is your design actually inclusive, or do you just want to be seen as an inclusive team that does work that includes people of color, disabled folk, LGBT community folk, et cetera? Inconsiderate research. And this is something that I see pretty much widespread regardless of tech or other industries, but it's so important to abandon the use of stereotypes. And the only reason our app exists, and it took so long to reach a point where it could exist, is because within tech, but specifically within the realm of dating, you do rely on stereotypes, binary stereotypes, stereotypes of how we relate to other people, and stereotypes about how things should function. So I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. And this is a perfect metaphor or example to what I think design power without a soul looks like. So you often have teams that are well-funded, that function well together. They might have a beautiful space, and they feel like they have the tools and resources needed to make incredible products that impact their desired communities or users. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with marginalized users or users who historically haven't been seen through other products or historically have been underserved, you have to have an authentic voice. And coming from an authentic voice means you have to have authentic designers, designers who know who they are, what they're making, and why. Diversity isn't the goal. So that's been a keyword for a few years now, at least 3 to 4, but it's painful to see because people aim for diversity, but you're simply putting people in a room and not giving them the resources to actually do the work that they want to do, make the changes that they want to make, and ultimately create beautiful things. So ultimately, sometimes the work comes down to, am I doing diversity work or am I doing design work? And so we should empower people and really acknowledge that diversity is just step 1 of maybe 10. So I see a lot of companies that don't have a soul. They're brands that don't exist as a group of people. They exist as a brand. And so there's this whole idea of creating a brand voice that's so separate from who we actually are as people and our innate desire to connect to each other, to be better, to be respectful, but ultimately to create things that really resonate. And so it's hard to do that when you can't do those first few steps of acknowledging where you come from and the roadblocks that we have industry-wide that prevent people from making great things. For us, it was easy. And my story was I sold all my things. I quit all of my jobs. I had 2. So I was doing freelance, and I had a normal tech job. I put all my stuff in storage, and I asked users, just a few tweets, if you really want to see this thing exist, donate. Everything else, I'm just going to give away. Can you make people feel that your product is important and that it should exist? Does it resonate deeply where they would donate or give you money to make something exist? And so the average person that donated money for this app was between 13 and 18 years old, and the average donation was $1 to $10, and we raised over $15,000 in the span of 2 months, simply via Tumblr, which is wild, but this is 2016, 17, so it's not. But can you create something that resonates? You have authentic messaging, but behind that messaging, that brand image, do they see who you are? Are your intentions genuine? Can you create something that drives people to say, I only have $7, I got paid last week, I have all these things going on in my life, but I want to give this to you? Because that's essentially what you're creating, right? Like whether it's content creation or design, the goal is to make users feel something, to give them a bit of beauty in their life, to bring hope to their day and say, this thing will help me do this. So it's important to do research. A lot of universities came to us and said, it's really great what you're making, we can help. We turned all of them down. And we continue to do so. So we've been featured in several thesis, essays, and books from Yale, Columbia, et cetera. There are other universities. But the issue is they're researching us because we refuse to collaborate with them. And the issue is I said, who's your research team? What do they look like? What are their backgrounds? Do they care about our users, or do they care about research funding, data points, and how to sell these data points to larger companies who then want to come back and say, can we then sell this larger data bundle to an advertisement agency, et cetera? So you have to be thinking about that process of what does harmful research look like? Are you getting your data from a Pew or a Nielsen? And what does that Nielsen team look like? What are their goals? And when they give you that data, does it come through a colonial lens? Does it come from a lens of we're studying these people, this group that doesn't relate to us, and we're going to give it to you so that you can create a product that doesn't exactly resonate? You see some products that kind of fall flat. They have an amazing team, amazing story, incredible backing, like they have the resources to do the work, but there's a disconnect. And it's often the research. And so how do we break that colonial trend of how we approach people, how we interact with people, and reconsider and reevaluate the ways that we talk to people to get information, to create these data points that determine what products we need to make. So here are a few points just to review with your team or with yourself when you're evaluating. Is this important? How should I go about this? And what does it mean? Who historically has been researched? So just think about loosely the dynamic. Has it been universities that historically have included people of most genders except for men? Where are the universities based? Do they historically have barriers to entry for people who aren't white? Where are the universities based? Are they based on colonial territories, or are they based in the West? What do they do with the data? Where is it stored? Who has access to it? Who can sell it? And when thinking about considerate research, also think about the emotional and psychological impact to a group of people that has been studied throughout the years, throughout the centuries, but hasn't had access to their personal information. So what happens when we make someone a data point? And how does that feel for them? And how is that a detriment both for that community and for the products you're making? Figure out what answers you're not receiving. So a lot of inconsiderate research often misses the most obvious point. There's someone who's never going to answer. And it's usually along the class line, but there are many barriers to providing information or being studied. Visibility is one. So as a Black queer technologist, I'm hyper visible. So there's only so few of us that when I launched this product, I was everywhere. But it was so strange because I would walk into a room and people couldn't really see me. So you deal with the duality of that. What communities have been historically invisibilized? And who wouldn't come to a research panel or a user study group or go online to fill out a form or respond to an email or a text or a newsletter or whatever else you do? Who's too busy in their day to respond to that? Or if they do have the time, do they feel like you'll genuinely listen and take their answer and say, I'm not going to manipulate this into a data point, but take it and say, this has meaning. This person's story might impact this product. Do they believe you? That's the big question. Gain user trust. So from the beginning, we had user trust because I was super honest. Like, I was on Instagram being like, I'm donating all my things. And people are like, oh my God, like, you're very serious. But it doesn't have to be that extreme. Gaining user trust is all about being authentic and really embodying your mission and saying, this is so deeply important to me because I know it's time out of your day. It's going to impact your life, hopefully, and it'll hopefully drive you to not only use this product or service more, but more deeply engage with who our company is as a culture. So create a one-on-one power dynamic. Often people feel like when they're being researched or when they're being studied, that they don't have the power to actually give you the answers that they want to say, or they feel like they have to answer in a formal way or in a professional way. So is the setting appropriate for who you're studying or who you're researching? Can you alleviate some of those tensions or some of those pain points by saying, hey, if you have the time, let's meet in a park, I'll buy you tea, I want to acknowledge I'm taking some time out of your day, but I'd love to get a sense of what this product means to you. How does it impact you? What could we change? Can we take a moment to bring ourselves down from that designer or creator podium and say, I'm another person trying to make a thing for another person. Hopefully you'll buy it. But what does that mean? And what does that relationship look like? And state your goals. Like, be honest. Be like, listen, I'm trying to sell you something. Will you buy it if you think it's worth it? And gaining user trust in my process was, I can't sell you anything. It's supposed to be a dating app, but will you donate to me? And that's even greater leap. I'm like, you're not going to get anything back, maybe ever. You know? So it really was users saying, I only have $10 this week, but I'm going to give you $5. What is that leap of saying, I trust you to make this thing eventually, who knows, on Tumblr, let alone, So it's really taking that time to say, I'm going to put in the authentic, genuine voice. I'm going to connect with people authentically in a way that matches their needs and their pain points and try my hardest to alleviate them. This is obvious. I mean, I see a lot of teams, a lot of people come to me, how can we embody that process? How can we fully reach that level where we're creating authentic design that resonates with communities? And then I look at the team and I'm like, do you know the users that you're trying to connect with? Do they look like the designers? And also, do they have power to speak up? It's one thing to hire people, and I've worked many jobs where I'm the only Black person. And so I'm not going to give authentic, genuine feedback. I want to be supported, I want to be seen, and I want to feel listened to. But also I understand that the people who pay me need me to do a job, so I'm not going to push back on the job that's requested. So I just do the standard, and it doesn't change anything. So even though they've hired people of color, Black people, marginalized people, et cetera, it hasn't changed the process, and the end result is the same. So it's hiring, paying, and empowering. So can you really listen to the marginalized people you hire? Don't just have them around sitting, but do you actually say, we want to destroy everything. Let's start over. We've made some mistakes clearly, or we feel like our culture is stale. The world is different, and it will be different in 20, 30, 40 years. Are we courageous enough to destroy the legacies of not only design systems, but systems of culture, systems of interaction, systems of really having an empathetic listening process? Are we able to say, you know what, this might hurt my feelings, but I want to hear it? So each design choice can make a user feel safe or excluded. Every single button, every single tap, every single motion. And so the main pain point that users would email me about, that folks would reach out to me about and say, I don't like the swipe. I don't like how many taps it takes to be rejected. I'm already marginalized. I'm dealing with other things in my life. I already feel like it's so hard, especially being a trans or non-binary person, to navigate dating, to connect with my community. I don't want the extra few buttons. It's frustrating to me. But also, we create this idea that we need to market ourselves. And when historically you haven't been able to market yourself because we live in a world where the most marketable people fit into a white, cis, able-bodied, relatively wealthy, tall, thin, healthy, English-speaking label, we cut a lot of people out. And so how can you reinforce through design that you belong here, we're gonna take our time, and we're gonna continue to implement changes to fix it. So it's mitigating mistakes. Ultimately, we hope to make a safe space. So it's been a long process of saying, we're not the best, we're very buggy, we're young, but we're trying. And so from that authentic voice, users said, I'll stick with you for the long haul. This is a mess, but I'll stick with you. And really putting in that time and communicating and saying, this is our goal. We wanna make you feel safe in the long term, but also we want to change the culture around safety. We don't want to be the only, we want to be the first. So when we launched, we were the first, but now we're not the only, which is a great trend to kind of say, okay, because of natural competitive nature of markets, Tinder was like, we're going to add 46 genders. I was like, fantastic. So we begin to have users who are saying, okay, take your time. There are other platforms now who will accommodate me. There are now airlines who will accept people who aren't in the binary gender boxes. So we're starting to see a shift in culture when we push against those rigid norms, and we say safety is most important, everything else comes next. Here are some resources. So you might be like, wow, this is a lot. How do I approach this? But also, how do I dive deeper? How can I share things with people that aren't here, that aren't present? This is a great website. I know it got cut off a little bit, but Design Justice. So there are a lot of designers who are committed to doing this work. I want to acknowledge that I've learned a lot from other people who've taught me, who've pushed me, who've challenged me, and really led me down this path of saying, okay, I want to create things that are way more considerate, that really embody my personal values, and that really land and impact people in a nice way. This is a paper from an MIT researcher that is fantastic. The whole thing is 18 pages. I was not going to put it here, but it's definitely worth reading. And for folks who are thinking about considerate research, this is definitely a paper that I recommend. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
If there are designs which focus on gender binary, is it best to in order to push things that way, to leave the box blank? How do you, as a user, react against that to make things go in the right way?
Yeah. First answer is go to thirst.co, and then you can find a link to download it on Google Play or the App Store. We're also on Instagram and Twitter. The second question is, it was tough to decide between an empty box and a multitude of choices. So giving users too many options, where some users say, I'm 17, I'm turning 18, I'm just figuring out my gender. What does it mean to have 46 now going on 50 gender options versus an empty box where you can fill in your own gender, make up a gender, or simply switch and choose and not feel confined to predefined labels, all of which are in English. So it was a design choice for us to make it an empty box. We had a lot of users saying, I'm making my own gender today. I'm like, that's rad. Do you? That's awesome. It's difficult on the back end to manage all of this data that essentially doesn't mean much to us. You can't use it to pair it with another data set, but it does make users feel good. On the other end is a lot of apps have chosen to implement multiple genders, where they say, okay, whether you're cis man, cis woman, et cetera, or non-binary, genderqueer, trans man, trans woman, genderqueer, or two-spirit, and then acknowledging that it might shift based on country, region, territory, et cetera. So there's a myriad of ways of doing it. You just have to be culturally sensitive, because what applies here in the US and Canada won't apply in various parts of Europe, won't apply to various parts of Western Africa, won't apply to South America, or indigenous groups and regions where they say, we reject this gender standard completely. So you really just have to consider research and approach that in saying what communities are we actually serving before we implement that for other products. But I found that what works best for me, being a US-based creator, is simply having an empty box and allowing people to say, this is what fits.
You mentioned in the beginning that y'all had to shut down for harassment reasons.
Yeah.
How were you able to solve that problem?
It was both easy and tough. So the main one was just user verification. So we didn't want to connect state-issued IDs, because folks said, I might be trans or non-binary, I might change my name, I don't want to be verified this way. We also had a lot of folks who were saying, I don't want to be verified by email. It's either connected to a parent or school or job. I don't want my data to be shared with another institution that might have my email, et cetera. And so because we were using third-party APIs and different services, we just wanted to be completely free. So we just used Twilio, so just a basic phone verification, and made sure that it couldn't be like VoIP or Google Voice. And then we really also emphasized our community policy. So we were like, okay, there's only so much we can do technically as a small team with a small budget, but what we can do is reshape our culture and have a really strong community policy which allows users to report other users who they feel are abusing others or harassing others, or just abusing the platform and its rights and privileges, which has really been allowing other people to be believed, has saved us a ton of time and reduced harassment. I believe it was about 6 months before we reduced harassment by 90%, which was a big number. But just really allowing people to feel heard was a big step. Thank you.